Vasishta continued. Thus, all this world appearance, with all the mobile and immobile beings in it, is not whatsoever. Nothing has really become physical or material. Even from a scientific point of view, there's very little evidence that the world is material. According to science, the world is made up of molecules, atoms, and these atoms have subatomic aspects to them. So we've got particles, which we tend to think of as real, and we've got forces, gravitational force, magnetic, electromagnetic forces, and so on. And of course these forces are immaterial. They cannot be experienced directly by the senses, only indirectly through their effects. So forces certainly aren't material, but even the so-called material, the particles, the atoms, if you look into them, their materiality seems to become rather vague. And in fact, the famous equation E equals mc squared tells us that all mass is essentially energy. So according to physics, the world we live in is essentially energy and forces. And you say, yes, but you know it's a material world. Look, it's material. But what's happening here? This is the sensation that we call resistance. And it's from that sensation of resistance that we build up our notions and concepts of materiality. If conceptualization, which gives rise to notions of being and non-being, is eliminated, then it is realized that all these jivas, the individual souls, etc., are empty expressions. They're no more than notions. They're simply notional. Notions of an individual me, an individual you. They're all just notions, aren't they? But we're in yogic territory here because it talks about the elimination of concepts. So we need to be careful in this chapter. Yogis want to kill the mind. Those of us following self-inquiry want to free ourselves from the mind. We don't want to kill it any more than we want to cut off our own hand. We free ourselves from identification of these notions. So let's be careful about this in this chapter, because it leads to some erroneous understanding. All the relationships that arise in one's heart on account of ignorance are seen to be non-existence. The heart usually signifies our essential nature, but the heart is the centre of feeling. So it's no coincidence that it's described as the heart, because the heart is where our passions lie. The heart indicates the passion with which we believe in our notions. Even when the rope is mistaken for a snake, no one can be bitten by that snake. So in other words, we're essentially, in our essence, we are untouched. It is absence of self-knowledge that is known as ignorance or delusion. When the self is known, one reaches the shores of limitless intelligence. When consciousness objectifies itself and regards itself as its own object of observation, there is avidya, or ignorance. So when consciousness objectifies itself, this is when we start parceling up the stream of experience into concepts, into objects, into finite entities. And we start believing in them, then that's ignorance or avidya. When this subject-object notion is transcended, all the veils that envelop the reality are removed. So here the talk is of transcendence, not about destroying the concepts or eliminating concepts. We transcend them. This is a better way of looking at it. The individual is nothing more than the personalized mind. Individuality ceases when that mind ceases. It remains as long as the notion of a personality remains. So long as there is a pot, there is also the notion of a space enclosed within or confined to that pot. When it is broken, the infinite space alone is, even when the pot space was imagined before. And you could argue the space was entirely unaffected by being potted. Rama asked, Lord, please tell me how this cosmic intelligence becomes things like insentient rocks. How can this vibrant, infinite potential become something as inert as a rock? Vasishta replied, in these substances like rocks, consciousness remains immobile, having abandoned the thinking faculty, but not having been able to reach the state of no mind. It is like the state of deep sleep, far away from the state of liberation. So we're getting into some rather dodgy territory here. We don't need to be concerned about rocks. We're getting into philosophizing here, which really isn't what the Yoga Vasishta is about. In this question, we're assuming that rocks, which are a product of our conceptualization, are real entities which have to therefore be accounted for. So let's just see what Vasishta says. They are immobile because they don't think. So they don't think, and they haven't reached the state of no mind. So it's like the state of deep sleep, which is far away from the state of liberation. Ram asked again, but if they exist as in a state of deep sleep without any concepts or percepts, I think they are close to liberation. Deep sleep's often spoken of in this context. When attempts are made to communicate the truth, it can only be done by analogy, by parable, metaphor. But the danger of this is these metaphors will start being taken literally. And this has happened with the metaphor of deep sleep, waking and dreaming. I mentioned this on previous occasions in a video. I mentioned it in a video called The Romance of Yoga. So we need to be careful about that.